And this is something I've said before. Many of his instincts are good. And his instinct from the beginning was, we don't need to go to war with Iran, nor do we want to. Now, in his mind, he thinks there's, quote unquote, a deal to be made.
So recently, Douglas Macgregor went on Andrew Napolitano's podcast to talk about Trump and his dealings with foreign policy, specifically in the Middle East. And perhaps that Trump's instincts on foreign policy are usually very good, especially when they relate to Iran. And this discussion becomes ever more interesting amidst rumors that there's a growing rift between Netanyahu and Trump. This is going to be interesting. Let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I just wonder where you think all of this is going. The slaps at Netanyahu, the negotiating directly with Hamas, the statements by the uber Zionist Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, that we're going to supply, this is the opposite of what he said 2 weeks ago, we're going to supply humanitarian aid and we don't need Israel's permission. The sending of the B-52s home, the cessation of the bombing of Yemen. What is the message from Trump to Netanyahu?
Well, remember that President Trump has this habit of flipping back and forth between different poles and different points of view. We've discussed that in the past. On the one hand, he recognizes Russia's legitimate security interests. He recognizes that they are not responsible for this terrible war, that we, in fact, pushed this whole regime in Kyiv to fight this war. So then he takes a 180-degree turn and starts repeating the popular neocon slogans that Russia wants all of Ukraine and threatens Eastern Europe, and we get this sort of stupid warmed-over domino theory, which has absolutely no application. So when you turn to the Middle East, I think we have to be very careful. This is what he's saying now. Since there is no long-term strategic framework that we can follow, no coherent strategy, then I think we have to be careful and scale back our expectations.
Yeah, totally agree with Macgregor here. Often Trump has said some very good things when it comes to the dissident, anti-war, non-interventionist foreign policy positions when it comes to when he talked about how in Ukraine he just wanted people to stop dying. When he brought Zelensky into the White House and said, you don't have the hand, you don't have the cards, you're gambling with millions of lives, you're gambling with World War III. That's great foreign policy instincts, and that's what could draw the U.S. out of there. Also, when it comes to the agreement he recently made to release the American hostage that was actually an Israeli IDF soldier and stop the bombing of Yemen without the approval of the Israelis or the green light and support of Netanyahu directly, actually directly engaging with individuals to do that without the buy-in of Israel. That is great instincts. However, some of the policies have manifested in a bad way, but let's hope that the good Trump, the instincts that brings him to believe that additional wars are bad, to triumph when it comes to an Iranian deal. That is what the dissident world wants right now.
What he's saying and doing at this point could, in fact, within a week or 2 weeks, change.
Right. It's very frustrating, the continual moving back and forth. Here's what his present, this is a little funny, here's what his present Secretary of State said about Donald Trump and his views on Palestine when they were competing for the Republican nomination for president in 2016. Number 10.
He's not going down.
He thinks the Palestinian is a real estate deal.
And these people may even be tougher than Chris Christie, okay?
The Palestinians are not a real estate deal, Donald.
Okay, no. A deal,
They're not a real estate deal.
Is a deal. Let me tell you,
a deal is not a deal when you're
ago.
dealing with terrorists. Have you,
you
ever
are not a negotiator. You are not a negotiator. And with your thinking, you will never bring peace. You will never bring peace.
Donald might be able to build condos in the Palestinian areas, but he's not going to. This is not a real estate deal.
Senator.
Well, he's.
Sometimes I wish we had that Trump back and Rubio would be pushed out of the administration completely. Of course, Rubio has been relatively subservient toward Trump and his interests generally. You can tell he still clings to his neocon ideals, but he does seem to be trying to follow the general agenda of Trump, which is not so quite rigidly neocon as most of Trump's predecessors were.
He's been saying he wants to be able to bring peace since that time, and yet he's funding the slaughter.
Well, if you know absolutely nothing about the region, about the people involved, the culture, the history, the geography, then I suppose you could make statements along the lines of what President Trump made. As much as it disturbs me to say so, I find myself in agreement with current Secretary of State Rubio, who then said this is not a real estate deal. This, I think, has been the bottom line difficulty for President Trump. He views everything as transactional and views everything as a negotiation with a transactional outcome. And he tends to fall back on his experience as a real estate mogul in New York City. And those things do not necessarily transfer easily to the international system. There's no basis for expecting the rest of the world to see everything through that distorting lens. So I think in this case, Mr. Rubio is right. He's still right. And I hope that President Trump has finally concluded that.
So, yeah, I generally agree with Macgregor here, but also it seems like the deal making in the Middle East has always been on behalf of Israel. It's never really been on behalf of Palestinians. It's always been aid to Israel, $4 billion a year go there in U.S. taxpayer money. Last year, much more, I think close to 20 million after October 7th and all the security guarantees and just shoveling taxpayer money into the coffers of Netanyahu, even when he was facing corruption allegations in Israel. That is what we've seen. We haven't really seen deal making on behalf or with the Palestinians as a partner at the table. It's all been with Israel. So I'm with Macgregor in that not all of aspects maybe related to real estate negotiations apply to the political arena. But I don't know. What I'd say is that I'm not much for political solutions whatsoever. I'm a libertarian, but I ultimately would argue that political solutions that are peaceable and based on negotiations and diplomacy are incredibly more preferable to political solutions that are just military. Shove it down the Palestinians' throat, this war in Gaza, which really isn't a war. It's a mass slaughter campaign there with no recourse from the Palestinians. And, the setting up of these concentration zones that even Israel will point to and talk about in a post, Hamas world. I don't think that Hamas can even be rid militarily. I think there has to be a peaceable solution to end the conflict. So I see where Macgregor is going here, but I do wish there was actual deal making of a multi-state solution, of borders maybe going back to 1967, due process guaranteed for Palestinians, and some sort of, maybe it's a negotiation of restitution or right of return in some way negotiated for the sake and benefit of Palestinians that lost their property due to blatant theft and the centralized planning of a country. That's what the UN did in Israel in 47 and 48.
Again, I don't know, Judge. I mean, I like you, I like the man, and I like many of his views, particularly domestic perspective, but this is just impossible to follow with any certainty.
Do you think he has a realistic understanding of Iran? Do you think he recognizes that Iran poses zero national security threat to the United States?
Well, the short answer is no, but he has an instinct. And this is something I've said before. Many of his instincts are good. And his instinct from the beginning was, we don't need to go to war with Iran, nor do we want to. Now, in his mind, he thinks there's, quote unquote, a deal to be made. Again, if you're an Iranian and you're watching this drama in Washington, D.C. play out, the question that you raise, and I think this is coming up all over the world, I think it's in Moscow and Beijing, everywhere. What's his position this week? We sign this today, and this will last till what? The midterm elections? In other words, how long does anything last? What's the evidence that we can bet on anything in the near term or the long term of the United States? What are the United States' real core interests? Are those core interests in the Persian Gulf? Are they in Israel? Are they in Ukraine? Most people look at this, shake their heads, and say, of course not. Our core interests are in the Western Hemisphere. But, what do you conclude? I don't think any of us can say with certainty what the answer to your question is.
Yeah, that's the craziest thing. I would actually give Trump credit, as a pretty big Trump critic in general, that his instincts on foreign policy are often very good. Not always very good, but often they are very good. And there's that old adage where, the best leaders actually, they have a base position, but then they seek, ideas from those that are closest to them, that they trust and place their trust in. But in Trump's case, he surrounded himself with some very bad people. Not all of them. Witkoff is great, I think. But if he's listening to people like Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio about U.S. foreign policy and what should be done, it explains completely why Trump's instincts have been better than the actual policies that have often been implemented. Now, I give Trump credit for at least ending the bombing campaign in Yemen recently and securing the return of that hostage I talked about earlier. But in those cases, he disregarded the advice from people around him in the Israel lobby that said you have to get Netanyahu's approval for this. And that's good. I hope he does the same thing for Iran. So Macgregor is right. Actually, if there's few people with better instincts in Washington, maybe than Trump, but he gets dissuaded and talked out of them. I don't think people like Thomas Massie or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz, for that matter, would be talked out of their good foreign policy instincts because they know that non-intervention is generally the right course. We haven't completely seen that from Trump. I hope we do get that, though. I have reason for optimism. It seems like there is some tangible seriousness to this potential rift with Netanyahu. Now, will that manifest in withdrawing aid to Israel? I don't think so, but I do like pushing Israel out of some of our negotiated policies that have come to fruition recently.
Yeah. But I wonder if he contemplates what Netanyahu might do if Witkoff crafts another real estate developer purporting to be an international diplomat who seems to be the de facto, not de jure, because he wasn't confirmed by the Senate, the de facto Secretary of State. If they enter into an agreement with Iran that does permit the enrichment of uranium for energy means and hospital uses.
First, the Iranians have made it very clear that they are not abandoning their nuclear power capability, nor are they prepared to give up enrichment or anything else. They're certainly not going to give up their missile arsenal and their theater ballistic missile capabilities. I don't know how you reach an agreement that includes those things without deeply offending and alienating Mr. Netanyahu.
Good. I hope that happens. For good, by the way, not just Netanyahu, the Israeli government, regardless of its current executive occupant. Withdraw all aid, just like we should withdraw aid from Ukraine and aid to Taiwan and Saudi Arabia. Good.
So I think you're right to raise that question. The question is that then the trigger for Mr. Netanyahu to launch his Israeli-only attack on Iran? And perhaps we shouldn't exclude this. I would not exclude the possibility that the British and the French don't aid the Israelis. So even if we're not initially involved, they well could support him because they have strange interests in the region. The British especially, who meddled in the Middle East for centuries, they would like to gain control of Iran's oil and natural gas fields. And I think the French would eagerly jump into that as well. So I think there are other dangers, other things in play. So simply because we say we don't think so doesn't mean it can't happen.
So interesting that Macgregor brings up the possibility of Britain and France assisting Israel in a potential strike against Iran if the U.S. doesn't want to go along. that is interesting if Macron or Starmer decides to do that. But if they do that, that should be to their own peril, not the peril of the United States going down the wrong foreign policy avenue again and striking Iran. And what Israel wants more than anything is regime change in Iran. They want nothing short of that. And that's why this potential nuclear deal with Iran negotiated by Trump is seen as such a threat to the Zionists and neocons, because it would take that pretense off the table again, like Obama seemed to have done in, what was it, 2014 or 2015, with the joint arrangement that curtailed the nuclear enrichment program then for a time, and Trump rescinded that agreement when he came to power. But that enraged the neocons like nothing else, and you're seeing that same sort of desperation from the neocons and Zionists that support Iranian regime change now. But I do want to hear from what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. Do you think Trump's foreign policy instincts, including on Iran, are good generally, or are they bad? Let me know down below. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll see you in the next one.